is jealous of Rachel Zegler, and you've got a story about the search for true love that's no longer about true love.
It's about power.
And it's being remade in 2024, and you sit here moaning about the differences between those two movies, like 1937 with...
Yeah, so what they've obviously tried to do is retain the artistic aesthetic of the cartoon from the 19...
I remember it like it was yesterday. Growing up, I wasn't afraid to admit it. Even as a grown man, I adored Disney princesses. From the very beginning of my childhood, I was enchanted by their stories. There was something magical about those worlds they lived in, a certain charm that gripped me. And no matter how old I got, no matter how much time passed, my admiration for Disney's magical realm never wavered. It all started with Snow White, the very first Disney princess. I mean, if Snow White had never been introduced to us, would Disney have ever blossomed into the phenomenon it is today? Would the entire pantheon of princesses, the magical kingdom we all came to know and love, ever have existed? It's hard to say, but one thing's for sure. Snow White was the cornerstone, the foundation on which everything else was built. Snow White's story has always held a special place in my heart. She was the beginning of it all. From her, we got the enchanting tales of princesses who would face adversity and rise above it, each story featuring love, courage, and magic. Fast forward to today, and we find ourselves in an era of live-action remakes, one that sparked a lot of discussion, and I'll admit, some strong opinions on whether these reboots are staying true to the essence of what made these stories so beloved.
The glory days.
Critical Drinker, your YouTube video on the trailer has now been viewed nearly 2.5 million times.
30s, but transpose it into a live action movie and it just looks horrific. It's so out of place. And when you see
the first place. Now, let me say this. I'm not one of those who easily agrees with every live action adaptation. For instance, the live action take on Snow White was something I just couldn't quite get behind. There was something about it that rubbed me the wrong way, something I couldn't put my finger on, but still I stood my ground. I was ready to support this Disney legacy, but I wasn't sold on how they handled the live-action versions. The way they reimagined the beloved characters, the way they tried to modernize the stories. There were moments I felt like they lost the magic. And don't get me started on some of the casting choices. Gal Gadot, for instance, someone who I personally thought might have been a good fit in the role of the evil queen, just didn't hit the mark. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Gal Gadot. She's a fantastic actress, but her portrayal as the evil queen fell off. It was like the depth and complexity of the character were lost in translation. I couldn't help but feel that this version of the evil queen lacked the nuanced, layered performance that the character needed. It was a far cry from the towering villainess that Disney had originally given us. But even as I was critiquing the performance, there was one thing I couldn't deny: Rachel Zegler's Snow White. She wasn't what I was expecting, but in some ways, she became a surprising standout. Rachel Zegler, the actress who took on the iconic role of Snow White, came under fire for some of her decisions. But here's the thing about her performance. Despite the criticism, there was something raw about it. Sure, she wasn't the Snow White I grew up with, but she brought her own energy to the character, and in doing so, she raised the stakes for what a modern Snow White could represent. Still, she wasn't flawless. Some of her acting choices left a lot to be desired, but I couldn't help but notice potential that had yet to fully be realized. You see, the magic was there, but it had yet to shine through. And then the plot unfolded. Oh boy. I can't tell you how many times I rolled my eyes. The story itself, though rooted in Disney's classic Snow White, seemed to stray further and further from the essence of what made the original tale so captivating. It started with a kingdom, a king, and his daughter Snow White. Everything seemed peaceful, idyllic even, until tragedy struck. The queen passed away, and suddenly, the king remarried a woman whose intentions were anything but good. The evil queen, played by Gal Gadot, was no longer just a vain, power-hungry woman. Her motivations seemed overblown, shallow even. Her jealousy of Snow White, once a nuanced trait, was now a near-cartoonish obsession. What I found particularly frustrating was how the movie chose to depict the evil queen's rise to power. Her logic for wanting to take everything away from Snow White seemed more simplistic than ever. In the original, her jealousy stemmed from a fear of losing her beauty, her power, and her status. In this remake, however, her actions seemed almost random, as if the writers were scrambling to add depth where it didn't naturally fit. Instead of a well-crafted villain with complex motivations, we got a character who seemed driven by the need for validation. Validation that was constantly being fed by her magic mirror, which in this version was given a strange and unnecessary twist. The iconic line, "Mirror, mirror on the wall," felt forced and awkward. The evil queen didn't seem like someone who was inherently evil, but rather someone grasping for attention. It was like the movie was trying too hard to make her a reflection of modern insecurities, but it lost the core of her character in the process. The evil queen's desperation to remain the most beautiful woman in the kingdom seemed exaggerated, and the lengths she went to, just to prove she was still relevant, were frankly tedious. But it wasn't just her portrayal that bothered me. The entire narrative structure seemed to fall apart as we moved further into the story. Snow White, now an innocent, vulnerable young woman, found herself subjected to the whims of the evil queen. She was forced into servitude, stripped of her royal status, and left to live under the tyranny of this cruel stepmother. At first, Snow White's...
And you said the new dwarf's look is nightmare fuel. Can you explain that for us, please?
Yeah, so what they've obviously tried to do is...
seemed like a mere pawn in a larger game. A girl with little agency who had no choice but to live out her fate as the queen's servant. It was around this time that I started to feel disillusioned with the story. Snow White's characterization, which was supposed to be innocent, nurturing, and magical, seemed sidelined. There was no room for her to develop into the strong, independent woman we all remember from the original tale. Instead, she was a mere plot device for the evil queen's descent into madness. Then, of course, we had the infamous poison apple. The evil queen, now in disguise, tricked Snow White into eating the apple, plunging her into an eternal sleep. But unlike the original story, there was no true emotional weight to the moment. No heartache, no sense of loss, just a plot point that needed to happen to move the story along. This was the point where the movie lost me entirely. Sure, it's a classic moment, but the way it was executed felt shallow, almost perfunctory. Meanwhile, the hero of the story, a thief named Jane then, had absolutely no chemistry with Snow White. I know, he's supposed to be the love interest, but there was nothing believable about their relationship. And honestly, Jonathan's role in the story felt forced, like they were trying to create a modern twist on the traditional prince, but ended up with something that lacked depth. And don't even get me started on the true love's kiss that saved Snow White. It was supposed to be this big, emotional moment, the culmination of the entire story, but it fell flat. There was no build-up, no connection between the characters. Jonathan's kiss didn't feel like the manifestation of true love, but rather a last-minute attempt to salvage the plot. Snow White woke up, yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a bit too convenient. As the film reached its climax, I couldn't help but feel that the story had lost its heart. The kingdom eventually turned against the evil queen, and Snow White, with her newfound love and strength, managed to restore peace. But by that point, I had already checked out. The emotional payoff just wasn't there. The movie had checked all the boxes: diversity, inclusivity, and representation, but had lost the core values that made Disney's princesses so magical to begin with. The visuals, while impressive in some places, lacked the consistency and enchantment that I had hoped for. Sure, there were moments of magic, but they were fleeting. The lighting was inconsistent, the CGI was often jarring, and the overall aesthetic failed to draw me in the way previous Disney films had. It felt like the magic was only skin deep, never truly immersing the audience in the world they were trying to create. The songs, too, were a letdown. They felt cheap, almost like they were thrown together at the last minute. Not a single one left a lasting impression, and that's saying something when you consider how iconic the music from previous Disney movies has been. In the end, what was missing from this film wasn't just a solid plot or great acting. It was the magic, the thing that makes Disney so special. The thing that draws us in and keeps us coming back. I wanted to see Snow White in a new way, but I wanted it to be magical to capture the essence of what made her so beloved in the first place. Instead, the filmmakers focused on ticking off diversity boxes, and while that's important, it shouldn't come at the cost of the core of the story. I left the theater feeling empty. Sure, it was a visually stunning movie in parts, and yes, the characters were diverse and inclusive, but it didn't make up for the lack of heart. In the end, I didn't get what I was hoping for. A fresh take on Snow White could have been an opportunity to explore her character in a deeper, more meaningful way, but instead, it felt like a missed opportunity. What could have been a powerful and beautiful story ended up feeling hollow. And for that, I can't help but feel disappointed. So there you have it. My thoughts on the live-action Snow White. I know this film will have its fans, but for me, it just didn't live up to the magic of the original. But hey, that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you all think. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, stay tuned.